Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Antony.
And this is Words and Numbers. Back to normal after your 250-mile trek through the wilds of Spain. No worse for wear, apparently.
No, actually, I survived it pretty well.
And oddly, this isn't the foolishness of the week. So we'll just leave that right there for now and ask the same old question. What's new and exciting in your world this week, Ant?
My new and exciting item comes from the Wall Street Journal. Roger Anderson has declared war on telemarketers. He has developed an artificial intelligence application that keeps them on the line as long as possible. There's a transcript of an example conversation in the article where the telemarketer calls up this guy and he's trying to get him to do the debt consolidation thing. And the telemarketer says, after the spiel, so what do you think? How much do you owe on your credit cards collectively? And what you're going to hear next is the AI speaking.
I have so many of them, There's one with a picture of a kitten on it, and another with a lovely beach scene. Do you like kittens or beaches?
And it just goes on like this. The point of the AI interface is to keep engaging the telemarketer in conversation so that he just wastes his time. Anderson's record is 15 minutes. His AI kept a telemarketer engaged in conversation for 15 minutes before the telemarketer hung up. For $25 a year, you can subscribe to his service and have your own AI, and it comes with various voices and whatnot, annoy your telemarketers.
Yeah, so when you first started talking about this, I thought, well, finally, I can see the death of telemarketing on the horizon. And then you said $25 a year, and I realized nobody's going to pay for that ever.
Oh, I don't know. I bet you there's a lot of people to pay for it. But what interests me is the next evolution in telemarketing is that the telemarketer himself is an AI. And so now we're in this very weird place where we've got one batch of AIs call up other AIs, and the two of them just engage in conversation until one of them gets tired and hangs up.
Telemarketing has been a scourge of the human race for decades now, and we're just never going to get out from under this. I remember when I first moved to California in the mid-1990s, there was a rule that if you got a call that you didn't want, right, if somebody was pestering you on the phone, you could report them and they would have to pay you. And then when fines started and the government started collecting that money, well, that was the end of that.
Yeah, imagine that. People respond to incentives.
That's right. If you really want to do away with telemarketing, make it expensive for telemarketers, not to deal with the government, but to deal with their ostensible customers. Once the government saw that people were getting money from telemarketers, it had to insert itself first in line.
Yeah, so now your best response is just to hang up on them. If I'm getting the bounty, I'll keep them on the line as long as possible.
That's right.
$5 a minute. Call me all day.
But it's never going to go that way. You're never going to get a dime, and you're always going to be annoyed. That's just how this is going to work.
Those of you that are interested, Roger Anderson, $25 a year, and you can annoy the telemarketers.
I want to talk about something that I actually love, cigars. Have I ever mentioned that I love cigars?
Often.
I don't know. Nobody's called to have me advertise a line. I'm not a spokesman for a line of cigars, which seems to be a real missed opportunity out there for someone.
Yeah, well, I have to relay the story. My last interaction with you and cigars was maybe 2 months ago. James texts me frantically in the middle of the night and says, there's this deal on cigars and you can get them really cheap. Order me some. I, from time to time, order cigars for James for various reasons. He said 4. I said, fine. So I get on there quickly. I see the thing. It's 4 of them. So I have them sent to my house, and I know I'm going to see him in a couple of weeks, so I'll just hand them to them. A couple of weeks later, maybe about 10 days later, I get in the mail 4 huge boxes. They were not 4 cigars. They were 4 boxes of cigars. There must have been a dozen or 2 dozen in each box. I was flying out to the Midwest where James and I were getting together. I had to bring an extra suitcase just to haul his stinking cigars.
Right, but let me ask the obvious question. What kind of idiot thinks one cigar costs $75?
What do I know? You're a cigar connoisseur.
What do you know is right? What do you know is exactly right? You should keep right on saying that. Anyway,
there's an answer to all this, which is find somebody else to buy your cigars.
Oh, come on, Aunt, you're my mule. And now I'm going to ruin what I just said by pointing out any number of cigars that cost $75 each.
Right.
Because I want to talk about Cuban cigars, the prices of which have utterly skyrocketed. They've doubled in the past year for most of the global market.
Why?
Well, that's the interesting question, right? I'll put a link to a story in the show notes that will give you the how much and the where. But the why is never covered in this article. What's emerging as the most likely truth is that the Chinese are buying up all the Cuban cigars they can find at whatever price they have to pay. So there are cigar lovers in China to whom money means almost nothing, and they are throwing the world market on Cuban cigars.
I was just reading today that I have no idea how many millionaires there are in China, but what I read today was that this year, 10,000 of them left China. They're expecting another 13,000 to leave China next year. If that's a fraction of the number of millionaires that are there are a lot of wealthy Chinese. So it follows that if they've got a taste for cigars, that's going to drive the market significantly.
And I'm wondering where they're going. It would seem that if there were one answer to that question, we would know it. Mm-hmm. So they're probably going to lots of different places.
Which underlines the fact that they're leaving China. It doesn't matter where they're going, they're just getting out of China. That's the commonality.
And this is something that we should likely look into a little more, right? Because how you get your wealth out of China is not easy. And how much are they having to leave behind? And these sorts of questions come up almost immediately. And we had heard some years back that Bitcoin was going to be the answer for Chinese people. Mm-hmm. It provided a level of portability that no other currency could in what they needed it for. I'd be interested to see how this is working, where they're going, how much they're bringing with them. These are all fascinating questions. Which, of course, Ant, brings us to the ever-popular foolishness of the week. I want to draw your attention to my home state of Arizona, where, as we speak, it is June 25th, 2023, and I believe it's been over 110 degrees every day here for 17 years at this point. It feels like it's never been cool, nor will it ever be cool here again. Every day I wake up and it's already over 100 degrees, and it just keeps getting hotter all day long. It's so hot.
How hot is it?
It's so hot that here in Arizona, doctors are treating a spike of patients who were burned by falling on the ground.
Really? Wow.
So it's all fun and games to talk about making bread in your mailbox, which people in Arizona are now doing, or trying to cook eggs on your dashboard, which people in Arizona are now doing. But these dumbasses are falling over in the parking lot and having to go to the hospital.
Because they're burned. Oh, my God.
That's how hot it is.
Well, what did you say the other day? Your pool, which is in the shade, is what, 88 degrees?
88 degrees. I remember when I moved here, a guy I knew said, whatever you do, James, as a matter of fact, it's longtime listener Dana Johnson, who's probably out there in Phoenix right now. Dana said, don't buy a house with a pool. And I said, you got to be kidding me. Why not? And he said, oh, you'll never use it. And I said, why? And he said, because it'll be too hot.
Yeah.
And I said, too hot to use a pool? And he said, no, too hot in the pool. Mm-hmm. He had one out in the sun, and his, he said, routinely gets over 90. In Connecticut, where I come from, they're probably all still in the low 70s right now. But now I got to think when I walk out to get the mail later not to trip and fall on the road.
And burn yourself.
Lest I get some sort of heat-induced road rash, and I have to go to the hospital to get the asphalt picked out of my aching skin.
For one-stop shopping for all things James and Ant, visit our website, wordsandnumbers.org.
This week, we're back to pop culture. Ant and I went and saw the same movie, not together, for those of you who are queuing up the jokes. And that movie was The Sound of Freedom, which, let's just hop right to the end, was a fabulously terrible movie.
I liked it.
Of course you did. You have no understanding of what a movie should be. Therefore, you liked it. And I know I'm teeing myself up for lots and lots of hate mail. And I suspect it's going to be every bit as bad as the kind I get when you and I write about Pope Francis.
Oh, I don't know. I knew going in that you didn't like it. I found it entertaining. It wasn't top quality movie, but I found it entertaining, certainly worth the price of the ticket.
This was a bad movie, and here's how you know it was a bad movie. Give me one example of character development in the movie with any of the characters from the movie.
Yeah, but see, you're all hoity-toity about these things.
No, I'm
much more
looking
simple. Did I enjoy it? Yeah, I enjoyed it.
You can't enjoy something that isn't good. So you're making the claim that it was good, at least in some way.
Yeah, but you're making the
And
claim good is objective.
It is objective. A good movie includes character development. That's just part of what a good movie is. The same way a good movie includes good cinematography. And I'll say, without any hesitation whatsoever, that I thought this movie did include great cinematography. It looked great. It had elements of a good movie. And I think there was a good movie to be written on this topic, even on this very story. It's a script that this movie was lacking. The script for this movie was just simply bad. It could have gotten around certain things by being a great action movie because, great action movies don't necessarily include a whole lot of character development. And yet there was almost no action in the movie. So it didn't go that route. It could have, but didn't. But the interesting thing here is that I wanted to see this movie in the first place. And why did I want to see it? How did I even hear about it? Well, I pay attention to online reviews and you hear the buzz about what's going on and what's being released. When we thought about going to see a movie, I said, there's this movie that I've been hearing about a lot that's getting really good word of mouth. And let's check out the reviews. I can't even remember what it's called, but we found it pretty quickly and gave it a good solid look. And the reviews were stellar. And I thought, I bet a movie that was made in this strange-ish sort of way about a thing that Hollywood doesn't grapple with all that well, that's getting great word of mouth, I bet this could be a really good movie.
I believe it had 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. At least it did a couple days ago.
I don't think it was that good, but it was very good regardless. Mm-hmm. So I went with every belief that I was going to enjoy the movie. I didn't walk in thinking this is going to be some conservative claptrap and I'm going to hate it. No, I went to the movie suspecting I would enjoy it quite a lot. And I just simply didn't. And that's down to the movie, not the topic and not the politics. And I need to stress that because I think this movie has become a mirror. I think people look into this movie, they see themselves, and that's their answer.
Well, we keep saying the movie, but I'm sure some people listening have no idea what this movie is.
Well, go right ahead.
The movie's about, and I had no idea what it was about. In fact, I hadn't even heard of it till you said, there's this movie, let's go check it out.
I'm sorry for that because I might have prepared you for the downer you were about to walk in on.
No,
right?
I thought it was fine.
Among other things, it is a hard movie to watch in certain places.
It is. It's about sex trafficking of children. That sounds awfully harsh. It's a story of sex trafficking of children in South America. It's the story of an actual Homeland Security agent who put his job on the line to go down and save a couple of children. In the whole story arc, you were looking for a character. If there is a character here, and I'm not big on character development as you are, but if there is one, I would say it's the topic of human trafficking.
Yeah, I guess. I can't give you that one because that's not a character, but I get what you're getting at.
Yeah.
There is some movement there, right? Certain things are dribbled out like breadcrumbs and you get to learn over time what the claims are regarding sex trafficking.
Here's the thing. You told me to go see this. I hadn't heard of it. And I didn't realize that this film was pushing this concept of child trafficking. In fact, if anything, I was biased in favor of the film at the outset when I saw that it was produced, and again, I didn't know this, by Angel Studios. We had actually a producer from Angel Studios on one of our episodes last year, and I like their work, generally speaking. And so there's this film, and at the end of the film, they give the story about what happened with the actual Homeland Security agent, and they talk about facts about human trafficking. And this is where, at the very end, and it's actually at the end after the credits, they say, stay tuned, and they show you all these statistics. It's at the very end that I started to become very uncomfortable.
Yeah,
because
that's
the
right.
numbers just didn't sound right. Now, at the time, I hadn't done research into any of the numbers, but nonetheless, they were outrageous enough. I say outrageous. They were of such a magnitude that I thought human trafficking can't possibly be this size of a problem if it isn't constantly on our radars.
That's right. And at the closing credits, there was a little placard on the screen saying special message in 1 minute, 20 seconds. And he gave you a countdown until the star of the movie, Jim Cazivell, came out and had his say as himself, not in character. I was a little surprised that they were going to do that. And I thought, well, this ought to be interesting. Let's have a listen. And I had the exact same reaction you did. I thought, what a bunch of red hot nonsense. I probably had a more extreme reaction to it than you did because, remember, I just sat through a movie that I thought was tripe. When you sit through a movie for 2 hours that you didn't enjoy and that you think not so great, and then all of a sudden you say, all right, well, let's see what comes next. There is a what comes next in this movie, apparently. And then that's irritating too. And I had the exact same reaction you did. I'm going to let you work through whatever numbers you brought. People are watching this movie. And remember, I referred to this as a mirror that people are holding up and they're seeing themselves in it, right? Whatever they already believe, they walk out believing more.
Yes.
And there's a group typically on the right in the United States, the group to whom this movie was marketed, who believe that sex trafficking and some kind of brutal pedophilia are among the worst problems we have right now, not in terms of their awfulness, because that I would grant them, but in terms of their prevalence, and that I will not grant them. Take a look around. Where do you see it? If it's as bad as you think, you'd see it everywhere, and you don't.
You have said this before, and I'll grant you that if it is as bad as what they say, we should be seeing a lot of it. However, there's a pretty big footnote, which is we're living here in the United States. Maybe it's prevalent elsewhere in the world, and we're not seeing it simply because it's not in front of us.
I'm sure that there are a few places where that's correct. There are places in the world where this sort of thing happens, but those places are not everywhere.
At the end, one of the facts that they give you in the closing credits of the movie is, and this is a quote, "The U.S. is one of the top destinations for human trafficking and is one of the top consumers for child sex." Being a numbers guy, it raised my eyebrows, but my tendency is to go look for numbers and let's see if indeed that is the case.
What'd you find?
When I started to look for numbers, I became even more perturbed than I was at the end of the movie, because I begin with, okay, let's define what we're talking about. And the UN has an entire arm that deals with this sort of stuff. They define, and this is apparently the term that everybody uses. I say everybody, it's used around the world. The State Department here in the United States uses it. Human trafficking. Human trafficking is one of two things, either sex trafficking or labor trafficking. Sex trafficking is an act in which commercial sex is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform such an act has not attained 18 years of age. Now, that sounds pretty straightforward.
I could live with that definition. That sounds perfect.
Okay, that's sex trafficking. And then we have the second bullet point under human trafficking, which is called elsewhere labor trafficking. And the definition is this: the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjugation to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. Now that I have a bit more of a problem dealing with, because our definition here is human trafficking, and this second bullet point includes, it has the transportation of people, but it also includes the recruitment, harboring, the provision, and the obtaining, none of which actually has to do with trafficking. Now, you can argue it feeds into the trafficking, and I can grant you that if you want to take the term more broadly.
All right, well, let's back up for a second, because why are we talking about labor trafficking at all?
Well, because the topic that concerns the United Nations and the State Department is human trafficking.
But there wasn't a claim made in the movie about human trafficking. It was sex trafficking, correct?
Right, which is a large subset of human trafficking.
All right, but I just want to establish that there was no sleight of hand on their part to substitute in a larger number this way.
No.
All right.
But I haven't gotten to the important part here, and this is where I become very concerned. And here, I'm reading from the State Department's website. They have, under this definition I've just read you, in bold, the following sentence: a victim need not be physically transported from one location to another for the crime to fall within this definition.
For sake. So here we are. Let me explain to the people how the United States is thusly quite the destination for human traffickers. You don't have to traffic anyone to be guilty of human trafficking. Trafficking, by definition, the word itself means to bring from one place to another.
And it seems to be the case that they're using the term trafficking synonymously with commerce. Anything that involves forced labor, forced sex in which commerce is involved appears to be falling under this definition of human trafficking.
How about this? Any prostitute with a pimp under this definition has been trafficked.
Well, I think by their definition, you would have to be able to show that there's force, fraud, or coercion involved. But other than that, yes.
A pimp is those things.
Okay.
A pimp is the living embodiment of force, fraud, and coercion.
Yeah, see, and here we have the problem that is now bothering me. That on the one hand, as you said quite correctly, this is a problem, sex trafficking, that absolutely we should be concerned about. The question is, what is the magnitude of the problem? And when I see definitions like this, it makes me very uncomfortable because the definition seems to be designed to inflate the numbers.
Of course it is. Sex trafficking is a problem in places like Thailand. People go on sex holidays to Bangkok. Well, that doesn't happen here. You don't go on sex holiday in the United States. Maybe you go to Vegas or Nevada. Prostitution is illegal in Vegas. People have a misconception about that. But it's legal in the rest of the state of Nevada, and you go to a legal brothel there. But that's about it. This is crazy talk. When people start manipulating statistics to get the answers they want, they are to be shamed over it. If your side is doing it for what you consider to be noble reasons, there's still a pack of liars who are manipulating data to pull the wool over everybody's eyes, and you shouldn't put up with it regardless of who's doing it.
Yeah, and I would hit it a little more softly. It could be the case that you're not necessarily attempting to pull the wool over people's eyes, but what you are doing, whether deliberately or inadvertently, is you're causing people like me who would otherwise be sympathetic to your message to now look at everything you're saying with a skeptic's eye.
And that's about where I am, right? So when I saw this movie, that was my knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah.
It was, oh, here we go again with this nonsense. And people have been whining about this sort of thing in the United States for the last 2 election cycles, right? And you might remember that a guy walked into a pizzeria back east with, I believe it was an AR-15, looking for the child prostitution ring that was allegedly in there. Meanwhile, a bunch of people are saying, we're a pizzeria. What the hell are you talking about? And yet there were a group of people out there who honestly believed that this was happening. There was, and I'm sure you remember this, a conspiracy theory that Wayfair, the company that sells furniture,
about that. Right.
that they were literally selling and shipping children all over the United States.
Right.
You gotta be kidding me. How stupid are you that you think that's happening?
Let me go back to the thing that initially in all of this first raised my attention. And that's, again, in these closing comments where they say, and again, here's the quote, the U.S. is one of the top destinations for human trafficking and is one of the top consumers for child sex. Now, I don't know what they mean by top consumers for child sex, but I've got definitions of the other thing. So let's go back to this. The U.S. is one of the top destinations for human trafficking. It turns out I've got numbers. And the numbers come from the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. These are the people who track this sort of thing. And granted, there are problems with numbers here because there are going to be all sorts of instances that aren't reported for whatever reason. But the numbers we've got, this is the best we've got to go on. Let me just show you what this is. The UN is reporting in 2020, worldwide, there were 9,826 prosecutions for human trafficking. Prosecutions. Now, what that means, we're back to definitions. That doesn't mean there were 9,876 instances of human trafficking. It means that there was enough evidence that the prosecutor brought charges.
All right, so let's be clear. It doesn't mean that there were only 9,000, but it also doesn't mean that there were as many as 9,000.
That's correct. The UN also provides numbers on convictions, which is quite useful. Of that 9,000, roughly half ended in convictions.
Worldwide?
Worldwide, so roughly 10,000 prosecutions, roughly 5,000 convictions.
In a world filled with how many billions of people?
8.
8 billion people. We have 4,500 convictions.
Well, yeah, now understand that's different from the number of victims. These are individuals who are being prosecuted.
Sure, I said nothing of the sort, right?
Sure.
What I'm pointing at is that we've got a gigantic pool of human beings and a pool of convictions so small that they could fill a medium-sized college campus at best.
Yes. Now, the counter-argument to that is, well, but that doesn't mean it's not rampant out there. It could mean simply that we're not very good at enforcing this sort of thing.
Well, it's more likely it means that it's just not reported.
But of all the countries in the world, what country would you expect to be among the top ones that are good at detecting this sort of thing, at catching the perpetrators, at prosecuting and gaining convictions? The United States.
That's right. It would be at the very top of the list.
Yes. So if indeed world prosecutions are low because the world in general is bad at catching these bad guys, and United States prosecutions are going to be high because the United States, generally speaking, is going to be good at capturing these bad guys, if that's the case, you should see that, yes, U.S. prosecutions for human trafficking are very high relative to the world, which is what they're saying. The U.S. is one of the top destinations for human trafficking. But here's the number, again from the United Nations. U.S. prosecutions for child trafficking in that same year, worldwide, it was almost 10,000. In the U.S., less than 1,500.
And hit me with the number of convictions.
Number of convictions, worldwide, 5,000. That same year in the U.S., 658.
Our conviction rate is lower than the rest of the world's.
Both in terms of prosecution and conviction, the U.S. accounts for roughly 13 to 14% of the worldwide numbers. So how you come up with this idea that the U.S. is one of the top destinations for human trafficking, I don't understand, because it isn't at all reflected in the data.
Well, here's how you know that there's a problem with our perceptions. I remember, and I'm sure our listeners remember, any number of times when they turned on their televisions and they saw a very splashy news conference, typically by an attorney general or a high-ranking law enforcement official, saying, we have captured a sex trafficking ring and all of these people have been arrested, blah, 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 blah. And then you never hear about it again, which means those people were not convicted.
Right.
Because if you had massive numbers of convictions in a child sex trafficking ring or a sex trafficking ring more broadly, you would hear about those convictions literally every single time.
Right.
And you don't, which means these are PR stunts by people, again, who should know better than to do it. Because what's the effect when you get law enforcement making these bizarre claims? What's the effect when you have a movie come out and capture the popular imagination the way this one has? You get people believing things that simply aren't true, and then they act on those beliefs.
Let me play devil's advocate once more here and argue that it could be...
In my mind, you are the devil's advocate.
It could be the case, forget about the rest of the world, our prosecution numbers on human trafficking are low because, for whatever reason, it's easy to fly under the radar. It's easy for the bad guys to get away with this. Law enforcement is overwhelmed. You can think of all sorts of arguments why it might be the case that our human trafficking prosecutions are low, despite the fact that there's a lot of human trafficking going on. And I thought to myself, all right, what other product is there out there that people try to get into the country illegally, that the federal government is constantly trying to look for and prosecute? and that's drugs. In fact, drugs are easier to hide than human beings are when you're trying to traffic them into the country.
That's right.
So
They're a lot easier.
if indeed our human trafficking prosecution numbers are low because we're simply not very good at this, there's lots of ways that you can get around the system, you can evade the authorities, then our drug trafficking prosecution should similarly be low. Do you want to take a guess at how large drug trafficking prosecutions are in the United States compared to human trafficking prosecutions?
Oh, multiple, hundreds of orders of magnitude.
30 times the size. In the year that we had 1,343 prosecutions for human trafficking, we also had just shy of 20,000 prosecutions for drug trafficking.
The drug trafficking definitions have not been ruthlessly expanded by special interest groups.
Yes.
In the same way. But here's the thing. If child trafficking were really that big a deal, you'd be able to go out and find yourself a child. You can't. I dare you to go try. You can't. How do I know? I know because you can't move children for damn near any reason. How do I know? I see people who get divorced and try to snatch their children from their divorced spouse. They get caught every time. It makes state and national news when people snatch a child.
Yes, you get the Amber Alert on your phone, the whole business.
Except for some reason when they do it for the purposes of sexual activity? Mm-hmm. I don't think so. That's not right. That raises more eyebrows. And how did this movie begin? This is the thing that got me right from the start. A father willingly drops off his 2 children with a total stranger at a hotel and leaves. Because that happens every day. Parents don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
This is ridiculous from stem to stern, but we never did really talk about how bad a movie it is. We're talking about how it's factually incorrect. And I think you can make a great movie that's factually incorrect. Inglourious Bastards comes to mind immediately. You find out Hitler's alive in the last scene. What happened there? There are all kinds of ways that you can make great movies that don't share in the nature of the truth all that well.
And the reverse. I think you can get away with making a mediocre movie that is factually correct.
And this one, I think, is less than mediocre and not factually correct.
One of the things this movie would have us believe, and I don't have the script in front of me, so I can't say whether they actually said this, but one of the impressions that you get from it is that when you talk about human trafficking, it's really sex trafficking you're talking about. And when you talk about sex trafficking, it's really children that you're talking about.
I think that's right.
Well, it turns out by the numbers, it is the case that most human trafficking is indeed sex trafficking as opposed to labor trafficking. I think the number is something like 70% plus is sex trafficking.
Yeah, but only if you buy that idiotic definition in the first place.
Yeah, you've got the problem with the definition. But here's the thing. And again, the numbers come from the UN. What fraction of victims of trafficking are children? 20%. Or say it another way, 80% of the victims of sex trafficking are not children.
And I'm not buying these numbers at all, because when trafficking doesn't involve trafficking, when it's just something we don't like, instead of something that has a definition of moving from one place to another against one's will, well, then it's not trafficking. I think a reasonable person has to look at this and say, this is all nonsense. You and I come up against this often. Unemployment comes to mind immediately. How do you define unemployment? Well, turns out it's really hard. And any definition that's given is going to have some problems with it. But that's because it's really hard, not because we can do it, but would prefer we got different numbers. And that's what we're getting with sex trafficking. We're getting people expanding the definition until it becomes a problem.
Someone might say in response to all of this, yes, but you guys are missing the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is a movie like this is meant to bring to people's attention this particular problem. And granted, maybe the problem isn't as large as the movie says, but the intent of the movie is to bring this, which indeed it did. I mean, look, we're doing an entire episode on this. But there's an unintended consequence here that I think is not worth the benefit of raising awareness. And that is that people do what we have just done.
That's right.
They look at this and say, look, these numbers aren't adding up. This doesn't make sense. And they could go one step further and say the whole thing is nonsense. And that's the end of people's attention on this problem for the next generation.
Some years ago, Ant, it was in the late 80s or probably in the early 90s, if I'm locating it correctly. There was a fantastic claim made that more women across the country were beaten on Super Bowl Sunday than any other day of the year. Now, I called bullshit on that the minute I heard it. How do I know it? That's the one day of the year that the men are most busy.
That's right. They're sitting on the couches watching.
Ain't nobody got time to beat women on Super Bowl Sunday. The Monday afterwards, maybe, but not Super Bowl Sunday. I pay attention to exactly nothing but my TV on Super Bowl Sunday. And I knew that was bullshit from the second I heard it. Mm-hmm. The people who made the claim were pretty quickly found out because really all you have to do is call a bunch of women's shelters and ask if you get more women on Super Bowl Sunday seeking shelter than any other day of the year. And everybody at the end of every telephone at every woman's shelter said, no, we're empty that day. The rejoinder came fast and furious. We're raising awareness. Sure, we lied, but it's okay because we're raising awareness. You raise awareness with the truth. The truth matters.
More than that, you're raising awareness in the wrong direction. So when people think about human trafficking, they think about children, taking their attention away from 80% of the victims who are women.
I think given the definitions that we were given, a lot of the adult women want to be trafficked. Given the definitions.
Given the definition that's being used.
Right. And I want people to hear what I'm saying, not what they think I'm saying. I think we've got a problem with open and closed borders around this issue. I think we've got a problem with legalized sex work around these issues. All of these things play. But if it doesn't matter whether a woman is brought from one place to another, if what really matters is if she's being coerced in any way whatsoever, well, everybody's going to be able to make a coercion argument about damn near anything. By those definitions, any sex worker can claim to be trafficked, or more likely, we can claim that the sex worker was trafficked.
Yeah, this is making me even more uncomfortable for the many times I've heard someone say that women can be coerced into sex work because of economic circumstances, which is not coercion. It's a sucky state of affairs, don't get me wrong, but coercion is one person imposing their will on another. If you broaden the term coercion to include things that actually aren't coercive, I can't make a living, therefore I turn to sex work. Well, by the UN's definition, if somebody drives me from point, no, they don't even have to drive me. I've been coerced.
That's right.
Into the situation. That's human trafficking.
Not only do you not have to leave your neighborhood, you don't have to leave your house.
Right.
You can be trafficked in your own house. In the final analysis, what we've got here is my movie review. The Sound of Freedom. It's bad and bad for you. And that's all the time we've got this week on Words and Numbers. Until next time, be sure to follow us on Twitter. Handles are in the show notes. Join Words and Numbers Backstage, the Facebook group where the conversation continues, and
send us email, wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com.
Until next week, try to be nice to one person who doesn't deserve it. Just one. And who knows, it may turn into a trend. Give it a shot. You might feel good about yourself.
You could say you tried.
You tried, that's right. Till next week, can't take it easy.
See you next week, James.